Olas Media. Olas Media presents Cannabis Enlightened. Now here's your host, Dr. Leroy Brady.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Cannabis Enlightened. I am your host, Dr. Leroy, and I'm just excited about today's program. We have a very distinguished individual who, I tell you, I've spoken with him maybe 3 or 4 times, and he's got a wealth of information that he knows how to synthesize this information and put it in a way where just about everybody can understand it. And that's what I really love about the way he speaks and the way he thinks. I met Gene at a conference in Coronado not too long ago. And unfortunately, they put him towards the end of the conference as opposed to the beginning. And I wrote about that in my evaluation of the conference, that he should have been at the beginning. But I was getting ready to leave the conference, and I saw him go to the big room to make the presentation, and something told me to turn around and go back in that room. So I did that. And when I got back into the room, he was already on the stage. And here's this humble man. He walks to the stage, and he begins to speak at a low volume, and then it gets higher and higher. And you can hear the passion and the enthusiasm in his voice. And I, as an individual, as an audience person, I went from just getting in the back door and maybe trying to sit in the back like many of us do in church, to moving to about the 3rd row. And I was just, amazed with what he had to say. So without, titillating your senses anymore, I want to bring Gene on, and I want him to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about your background before we get into the real meat of today's episode.
Well, first of all, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and pleased to join you today. Happy you enjoyed the presentation. Let's see, my background. In order to discuss my background, I have to go to my parents and my birth. I'm born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, so the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Quickly moved to the United States, but was born of parents who were lucky enough in Haiti to have education. So my father is a physician, and my mother is a pharmacist. And actually, my father's father, is a physician, and his wife ran a pharmacy. So I've got a long history of medical practice and pharmaceutical medicine in my background. Grew up in New Jersey, so you might hear the New Jersey accent in there. And did my schooling, undergrad and graduate in New England, Brown University in Rhode Island, and Boston University School of Medicine. And then came out to the West Coast, where I discovered a culture. I trained in the West Coast in family and community medicine. And I like to emphasize the community because that's really what brings me to the world of cannabis science. In San Francisco, which is where I am now and where I did my training, I was introduced to a culture of folks using cannabis as medicine. In 1996, back in the middle of my residency, Californians passed the Compassionate Use Act, which allowed people in the community to access cannabis for medical needs. So that long way around, from the islands in the Caribbean all the way to the West Coast of California.
And maybe the only thing that remains from your Haitian background is the fact that you, in fact, and that was this, what I'm getting ready to say is something that intrigued me. You have very long dreadlocks.
Yeah.
The-
I don't know if that came from Haiti or from California.
Okay, but I think the audience will probably hear the New Jersey accent every now and then. You know, I was very intrigued as we talked previously about the fact that, as you mentioned, you come from a deep medical background. I mean, you know, people that are well trenched in the science and working with the body, and you know, the knowledgeable folks that everyone looks to if something is going wrong with them. How do I fix this? How do I fix that? And I venture to guess you get that a lot when you go to parties or something. Hey doc, I got this pain right here. What do you think? So
Absolutely.
so and I think we're going to get into that. Not I think, I know we're going to get into this, some of that with respect to cannabis, but you talked a little bit about, you know, the things that brought you into the cannabis space. Can you kind of elaborate about that from a medical, from a doctor that was in medical practice to cannabis research? What was it that brought you into that?
Wow. Well, you know, I guess I back in medical school, I started enjoying the aspects of medical anthropology through a dear friend that I had during medical school, which really looks at cultural differences in medicine. That medicine really changes from culture to culture. For example, the idea of depression may be pretty clear in the United States, but may not be acknowledged in other countries. So, you know, even the fundamental diagnoses are not the same throughout the world and through different cultures. That was fascinating to me, you know, coming from a scientist perspective where we're very objective and we're looking at, you know, the molecular reasons for things. You know, how could a group of people's perspective really change a fundamental diagnosis, and that, you know, is fascinating to me, which is why I went into family and community medicine, because it really looked at the culture as part of therapy, and as important in therapy. Why prescribe a blood pressure medicine to someone who will then turn around and go through to their traditional healer and use a different medicine and not pay attention to it? So really important for you to incorporate a person's culture when looking at how to treat them, you know, and really the outcome is important when you're looking at that culture. So that's how I got around to it. And coming out to San Francisco, there's a group of old hippies, you know, that really had adopted cannabis. And at the time, we were toward, you know, in the middle, or actually, I would say, of the AIDS epidemic. And, you know, there were also a group of people with AIDS who were looking also to cannabis to help with tolerating their medication or chronic pain. This is a reality that if you didn't address as you were practicing, you were left in the dark as a physician. You know, you were sort of talking to the wall. You weren't really engaging with your patients.
So doctor, so the audience perhaps understands a little bit clearer. When you talk about culture, you're not just talking about a race of people or a person's color or something, right? You've expanded that. So can you talk about the cultural? Because I get it in San Francisco, because there's a whole culture in San Francisco.
Mhm.
There's a culture in San Francisco.
Mhm.
But how do you see the culture?
Absolutely, like a subculture, or, you know, a community, a group of people who begin to hold common beliefs and begin to act on those common beliefs, and that's an evolving concept. You know, it's no longer relegated to geographical boundaries, right? It's as we're listening to the Supreme Court here, nominees hearings, it comes up, the changes in the law that the Supreme Court has to deal with. There's this fundamental constitution, and then there's this culture, this U.S. culture that's evolving around it, and how they have to make those two match is very interesting. So it doesn't just happen in medicine; it happens in law too.
You're absolutely right. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was listening to a little bit of that on my way in, and I had to stop because I have to get in the podcast mode. But you're absolutely right. It was so very interesting. Back to the cannabis aspect of your treatment. Prior to working with cannabis, how would you treat patients?
Well, I've always been, I'm family and community medicine is primary care. So we're sort of the first doc that you run into as you're going into seeking care for a problem, or even not. We do everything from delivering babies, and providing kids with care growing up, to adults. And so it really looks at medicine in a broader spectrum. So, the key when you're approaching it is not only knowing the right answer, but also being a good listener. Right. And so that's really what I enjoyed, being a good listener, trying to hear what the patient's telling me, and open-ended questions. Let them describe how they're experiencing their illness.
Right. And the reason why I'm really bringing that out is that because many people feel like this cannabis thing is maybe just that, a thing, and it's just a fad, and it's going to go away, and there's not much to it. And as much as I bring I think very interesting guests on the program through the episodes that I provide, you're the first medical doctor. So, what you say is very important. And I wanted folks to really understand that you're not just a doctor that, somebody that woke up in the morning and said, I'm going to call myself a medical doctor. You are a trained, licensed physician who happens to feel like cannabis has a place as medicine in this world.
Absolutely. I mean, it has. If you look at history, it has, right? It's documented that it has. And it's gone through this very tumultuous existence, from acceptance to rejection, to acceptance to rejection, in multiple cultures throughout the world. So to say that it's a fad after thousands and thousands of years of its existence, its existence as medicine, is just sort of a little short-sighted.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you even more. And that's one of the reasons why I really wanted you on the podcast, because when I listened to your presentation, you were in fact talking about something that's very interesting to a lot of people, because folks will pick up cannabis, hopefully at a legitimate, legal, cannabis store, and they'll listen to the bud tender or the concierge, and they really won't get it. They'll give them a pack of edibles or whatever they like, however they want to consume it, and they don't really know how to take it. And your presentation was about dosing. And I found that absolutely fantastic, that fascinating beyond belief. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Our project, so about 7 years ago, we started a nonprofit cannabis research organization Why? Because, many folks were calling for research in the space, and there just wasn't any. Let me take that back. There was research, but it was research from a single agent pharmaceutical approach, which means traditions in pharmacology looks at one chemical, one active ingredient, and exploits that. If you go to the store and you pick up that bottle of Advil or Motrin, the active ingredient is ibuprofen, and it will give you the milligrams that you get for every tablet of ibuprofen. Or your blood pressure, it's one chemical. That pharmacology has expanded a little bit from there. They're now 2 chemical agents. For HIV medicine, 3 chemical agents. Wow, we're really getting complex. Well, take the leap into this flower that has over 100 potential chemicals in it. Not only that, but it varies from crop to crop, from cultivar or strain to cultivar. So it really adds a huge complexity to the traditions of pharmacology. As I'm talking to patients, and people are coming to me telling me that they're using cannabis, or they're asking, I'd like to try this. What the physician does is recommend a dosage, right? How do you recommend a dosage with something that's a moving target, right? Exactly. And it's got all these chemicals. So that's, to me, rather than, I can't do this, it was so exciting. Wow, we're going to have to redefine pharmacology in order to do this. So that was why we started our organization. We started something called the Dosing Project. And again, using the approach that I was most comfortable with, which is sourcing the information from the community rather than dictating, oh, you should use THC or CBD. My question to the community was, what are you using? How do I characterize what you're using? How do I put it in categorize, and how do I analyze it? That's the Dosing Project. So we source our information from the community, and then we come up with dosage formulations from what the community is using to be able to recommend, predict an effect, or make sure that what they're taking is safe and that they don't get any adverse events or negative effects from it. So that's how we got to the whole idea.
So you use actual patients to give you their reaction to a certain amount of THC or CBD, or you use a wide variety of elements that are contained in cannabis?
Yeah, well, we first started with THC and CBD because if you look at the plant, there is a dominant cannabinoid. And there's been a lot of research on THC. I mean, THC was discovered, in the 50s. And there's actually pharmaceutical medicines that are single agent THC. And I say single agent, it's not like the plant. It doesn't have the hundreds of chemicals in it. It has one chemical, which is what's comfortable in pharmacology, right? So there recently was a new CBD medicine, Epidiolex, that came out, for a very rare seizure condition, a pediatric seizure condition. And what's in that formulation? Just CBD, just one active ingredient. But I knew that the community, if you gave them a prescription for that THC or you gave them a prescription for the CBD, they tended to say, it doesn't work, I'm going to go back to the plant. And I was like, well, we're missing something here. We got to figure out what they're taking. And it's more than just THC or CBD. But THC and CBD are the stakes in the ground, because you look at the plant and these are the dominant active ingredients, and the plant really comes in three types. It comes as a THC dominant plant where there's mostly THC that's produced in the flower, or a CBD dominant plant where there's mostly CBD produced in the flower, or a 1-to-1 where there's an equal amount of both. And what's interesting about THC and CBD, they come from the same genetic allele. They come from the same gene. And and the gene either produces an enzyme that converts the originating chemical to THC, or converts it to CBD. So they have the same parents, right? I call them siblings, in the plant, and they have the same parents. And it's just whether you're born whether the plant has the genetics for one or the other, or it might be codominant where it has the genetics for both, and then it gives you a 1-to-1 ratio of both. And so that's where we started. We were like, okay, this is how we can begin to characterize and categorize the plant. We can call it a THC dominant, CBD dominant, or 1-to-1. And this wasn't us. This was done again by botanists years ago. We took the information that they've done and we carried it on. Then we started looking at other active ingredients. Now that we could, put things into certain boxes, we can say now, okay, well, if you're using a THC dominant plant, what else is in it? And this is where we began to ask the community, but the community wasn't analyzing the flower, sending it to they were smelling it. They were smelling it, and they were telling us, well, if we've got pain, then we tend to like the more pungent fuel-like flower. And if we've got low mood and want to uplift our mood, we like the more fruity or floral smelling cannabis. And so we're like, aha, another clue. Let's figure out what's in these two aroma types, as we call them. And that's where we start to dig. So it's almost like being a detective, a pharmaceutical detective, to try to, what we call deconvolute the complexity, to untangle the complexity of this multi-agent botanical.
That's interesting that folks would smell the plant to be able to categorize what it might do for you. So with that, I want to go back to you. You separated them, THC and CBD. What, in your research, what is the common reaction to each one, to THC, just THC, and just CBD? Because I know the people listening to this are going to say, well, if I take THC, then I might feel this way. If I take CBD, I might feel that way. But I'd like them to get it from an expert.
Right. Well, so another central idea and something that was recently discovered, I mean, late 1980s, early 1990s, that's recent for science. Is something called the endocannabinoid system, which is there. We have receptors in our body that these chemicals attach to, and it's sort of like pushing a button. The chemical attaches, or as people like to describe it, a key in a lock. The key is the chemical, and the lock is the receptor. Key fits into the lock and creates all these activities. So that's sort of how it works. This is naturally happening in every human and every animal, actually. When we do take this plant, the THC and the CBD fit into the locks of this system. So the endocannabinoid system, it fits into the lock. So this plant chemical is now affecting this internal system that we have. Well, I would say that THC, let's see, I like to compare it to a car engine for my patients, where if this system is an engine running regularly in your body, THC is like stepping on the gas, like putting fuel in the engine, right? And CBD is like putting oil in the engine, right? They work both to better the engine or improve the engine's function, but in different ways. But the biggest difference between the two really is, or the most noticeable, maybe not the most important, but the most noticeable difference is the psychoactivity. THC gets you high. CBD does not get you high. And so that's how people notice it. And that's how you might get recommendations from the bud tender as you go into the cannabis store. Because what they really know in those stores, they're not necessarily how THC and CBD work. What they know is how to get high. Unfortunately, that's the culture that's happening out there right now. We're trying to train them to explain to them how THC and CBD works. But the biggest side effect and the thing that most people seem to focus on is the high. And it's funny that when you look at research, you really see that we've focused most of our research. We've discovered these things in the 50s. We've been looking at it and we've been focusing on THC as this is the most important. Well, why? Why haven't we been looking more at CBD? Why haven't we been looking at the terpenes or the esters or thiols, all the other chemicals in there? Well, I think our society, even to the level of the scientists, has a fascination with the high.
Stay with us. We'll be back with more Dr. Leroy after this quick break. You're listening to Cannabis Enlightened on the Olas Media Podcast Network.
American democracy's good, but we can make it better. The National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers includes organizations across the country who are working right now to build a better democracy by opening primaries, implementing safe, secure voting systems, reducing corruption, and increasing transparency. Listen to our weekly podcast, How to Win Friends and Save the Republic, to hear updates from the latest movements in the democracy reform space. Subscribe and learn more about us at nonpartisanreformers.org.
You're listening to Cannabis Enlightened on the Olas Media Podcast Network. Now, here's your host, Dr. Leroy Brady.
It's interesting that I like the way you put the receptors and the key, because a lot of people don't, that term alone is very foreign to people, that we have receptors in our bodies that will receive either the THC or the CBD or both. Sometimes they're offered both together, and depending upon the receptors, how it's received is how the body will react.
Correct.
And there isn't, you generally, you can't tell a person, well, if you take this is how you're going to react, because everybody's different.
Yes, that's another complexity to it. That happens generally in pharmaceutical medicine. Yeah.
With medicine just anyway. Yes.
In the blood pressure medicine, we generally know what's going to happen to you, right? But people are different, and so we will prescribe something, and then we'll check back in with you to see if it's working. And if it's not working, we might switch medicines. And so there's a little bit of trial and error that happens with a physician. We've gotten into something called, and I'm sorry if I'm getting you off track here.
No. But you're good. You're good.
All right. In medicine, we've gotten into something called precision medicine. And this happens a lot in oncology, when we're treating cancers, where we check with the person we're giving the medicine to, we check their genetics. We check their, we do a cheek swab. We see whether you're going to react, or you tend to react with your genetics better to one medicine than another. So it's called precision medicine. It's sort of an exciting new field, or a new concept in traditional medicine, where we're going to get a little bit better at dialing in which medicines are going to work better for you than another medicine.
And
that's also something we're exploring in the cannabis.
I was just getting ready to say that that's something that is being investigated or researched in the cannabis space.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Which I think will make some people, maybe a lot of people, a lot happier with trying cannabis, because they really don't know what to expect when they've taken either a THC dominant or CBD dominant strain, and whatever happens to them, they're sometimes they get like freaked out, you know. And I tell people all the time that chances of you overdosing with cannabis is very low. I mean, you probably won't die from it unless 2 tons is dropped directly on your head. And they too smile at that. And, you know, the chances of that happening to people are you know, slim and none. But they're just afraid to try because of the unknown, and also because, unfortunately, and it's something that you probably live under in your research, from a federal standpoint, it's a Schedule I drug.
Yeah. I mean, the propaganda that put it in as a Schedule I drug, you know, wasn't based on science. It was really more socio-political reasons for putting it in that area. And we're, you know, as a society, we're afraid of it because of politics, really, and not really of science. What we do know is that there are very few receptors in the respiratory drive center of your brainstem. So there's an area in your brain that controls your breathing. And that area has a lot of opiate receptors, which is why people overdose with the opiates, which is why we're having such a problem with opiates. People are overdosing and they stop breathing, basically. But these cannabinoid receptors are very few in respiratory drives. It doesn't suppress your breathing. It doesn't cause that overdose effect, which is why it's considered a lot safer as pain medicine than opiates. But opiates are not in Schedule I, whereas cannabis is.
Yes.
That's where we're going cross purposes.
It kind of baffles the mind how something cannot be a Schedule I drug, but it has done so much damage to people. And even in the legal environment, a lot of lawsuits have been won because of opioid overdosing. And then there's cannabis that's sitting over there, I guess, on the sideline, waiting to go into the game, ready and willing. That's not going to have that same effect, but folks are still hesitant. Has there been anything that's happened recently in your research that has given you a lot of hope and, you know, excitement about cannabis coming into the mainstream?
You mean new discoveries that
Yes.
we've had, or
Right.
well, I guess go ahead.
No, I was going to say any breakthroughs, because I'm willing to bet that as a researcher, as a scientist, that, you know, every day brings something new. But
yeah, I guess just last week I was reading a paper. I mean, there are many stories. But just last week I was reading a paper on a condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome. It's a syndrome in which women are infertile because for some reason they're developing cysts in their ovaries and producing androgens, a certain sex hormone that keeps them from being able to have babies. So there are a group of scientists in Bulgaria who were checking the level of your endocannabinoids. So that's related to the endocannabinoid system. And those are the chemicals in your body that are similar to THC and CBD. And they were noticing that one of those, in a group of these women, the levels were low for a specific endocannabinoid, which to me was signaling, wow, so we're seeing now deficits in your endocannabinoid system, sort of an endocannabinoid deficiency. And that's been proposed by other scientists before, so it's not a new concept, but we're starting to discover specific conditions where you may be endocannabinoid deficient, and where the potential of introducing cannabinoids to that system may be therapeutic. It may be important. So this is a group of women. Not everybody has PCOS, but it's beginning to introduce ideas that. But there are lots of exciting conditions, from cannabinoids reducing your blood pressure, cannabinoids helping insulin and helping you pick up glucose, thereby maybe help a potential treatment for diabetes. And of course, the anti-cancer effects of cannabinoids. Those have definitely been noted. So we're studying, as much as we can. I know there's a group out in Europe, in UK, that's studying specifically glioblastoma, which is a brain cancer in kids, or it can be in adults too, and cannabis, or liver cancer and cannabis. And so there are trials happening. They're small. They're not as well funded as they should be because of the stigma of cannabis. But yeah, there are advances everywhere happening.
And I'm hopeful that with a podcast like this, and hopefully there will be many others that follow, that have a knowledgeable guests like you, we'll try to tear down a lot of that, the misconceptions and the falsehoods and what I call just out and out lies about cannabis and what it can do to our system. I know that I've spoken to a lot of people, and even when have gone to their doctor, and even as I've gone to my doctor, and he'll ask, well, how are you managing pain? And I'll say, well, I'll take maybe a Tylenol or an Advil. And I say, I also believe in cannabis. It's almost like I didn't say cannabis, because they'll go to the, okay, now when you take the Tylenol.
Yeah. So that's so funny. Yeah.
So no, I just, I'm really delighted to hear you talk openly about that. And I hope that when people hear this, they'll say, wow, he's out of the closet about this stuff. This is not something that's, secret squirrel kind of stuff. This is, you need to pay attention. You need to do some research, and you need to read to find out, more about cannabis. So
yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, the medical community, is not teaching endocannabinoid system although it's been, years and years that we've discovered this. We're not teaching it in schools. And so, maybe because of the stigma, I don't know. So that's really got to be what we have to change and so physicians, when you bring it up to them, they feel uncomfortable, like that nobody's really taught them about this, and you really have to investigate it on your own. So I feel for both sides, the uncomfortable physician who hasn't been properly trained, and the patient who has to experiment on their own because the physician, can't help them with it.
Well, is it safe to say, doctor, that if you are going to experiment on your own, as something you alluded to a few minutes ago, you should start at a very low amount? I mean, you shouldn't just, just like you would an over-the-counter kind of a medication. You wouldn't take, 5 or 6 pills at one time. I mean, the bottle says take 2, right? So
That's right.
d-
That's
do you-
right. Yeah, creep
go ahead.
up on it rather than slamming yourself with the with the medicine. Absolutely.
And to wait. I think a lot of us are used to taking a medication and, oh my gosh, I got to feel differently in about 2 seconds. And that's not, I see your head shaking. No, that's not the way it happens with cannabis. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, it depends on how you're using it. If you're inhaling it, then it goes directly into your bloodstream through your lungs, and affects you pretty much immediately in a few minutes. If you're ingesting it, it's got to travel down your throat, past your stomach, through your liver. It gets converted by your liver and then into your bloodstream, right? That could take a good hour. So if you're eating it, wait an hour before judging what it's doing. And, many college students have that experience of taking a cannabis brownie, and it being tasty, and saying, "Oh, that was a good brownie. Let me have another one and another one." And and thankfully, they are not passing out like drinking too much alcohol. Thankfully, they have an unpleasant evening and they're waking up the next day. So it definitely is safer than alcohol, but it's not a pleasant experience. And so wait the hour before judging your dose.
A lot of people are looking for the same kind of effect. You mentioned alcohol. They're looking for that same kind of effect. Like if a person takes a shot of a tequila or bourbon or something, they feel the burn down their throat into their stomach, and then I guess pretty rapidly, it shoots back up to the brain and says, "Hey, we're feeling really good now." But that's not a cannabis result.
Yeah, you're right. Well, alcohol is much more rapidly goes through. Cannabinoids are fats, and so fats don't absorb as well as alcohol. Alcohols can absorb in the blood vessels in your mouth much better, and along the whole path through your stomach, they absorb much better. But fats take a little bit of doing to get into your system, and so that's why it delays it.
Okay, very good. So, doctor, can I just go back a minute, because you were talking about the endocannabinoid system? Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I want the listeners to feel like, after listening to this episode, that they know enough where, at least if they haven't tried anything, they might feel like going to a legal store and trying a little bit, and knowing how it's going to react in their body, how it might react in their body.
Okay, well, I like to deconstruct the endocannabinoid system into 3 general fields of understanding: psychology, so your emotions; neurology, your nerves; and immunology, your inflammatory system, your reactive system. Think about those 3 systems, and think about the endocannabinoid system as the link to all those 3 things and bringing them in together. Back in the 80s, there was a group of scientists that were championing this idea of psychoneuroimmunology. Does your mental health influence your nerves, influence your immune system? And people might say, of course it does. When I'm happy, I'm well, right? But so it's sort of a general, and this is why community is so brilliant. They always give us but scientists are have broken things into parts, and now we're trying to put them back together, right? So the endocannabinoid system may be that link. It may be the link. And so I like to look at it as an engine in your body, an engine that's connected to multiple parts, may connected to the radiator, may connected to the wheels, connected to the fuel tank, and that's, to me, it's an engine that's running every day, all the time in your body, just chugging along. And some people like to say it's keeping you at homeostasis. It's keeping your body in balance every day. And what we do when we add an outside source like cannabis to that engine is we're either putting fuel in the engine or we're putting oil in the engine, right? And that's the THC and CBD idea. And so if you approach it that way, then, sometimes you got to back off and say, hey, too much fuel, too much oil. Sometimes you got to say, need more fuel, need more oil. And also you've got to balance the two. And that's how I would approach it. Absolutely starting at little amounts and creeping up and judging it in the right frame of mind, as you pointed out. But know that your engine's always running and you're affecting it by adding these two elements to it.
Fantastic. Now,
did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. That was beautiful. I mean, I couldn't have wanted any more than that. That was excellent. Do you, in addition to your research, do you see patients with respect to or in regard to cannabis?
Absolutely. That's the mainstay. They are the source. They are what's driving my research, right?
Okay.
I wouldn't, that's what I started with. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
the patients are key. That's that.
Fantastic. So if after listening to this episode, folks want to get in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you?
So I'd say, well, we have an 800 number, 866-632-6627. And you can schedule an appointment with me or another one of our doctors. We can do telehealth, so we can do appointments over video or over the phone. And if you want to donate to our research, we're at www.the C as in Charlie, E as in Edward, S as in Sam, C as in Charlie again, .org. So those are our two organizations. One is mostly patient education and consultation, and the other is nonprofit cannabis research.
I want to thank you. This has been very, very informative. You're packed full of a lot of knowledge, and you've expressed it in such a way that I know the listeners will be able to receive it in their receptors, in their mind receptors. They'll be able to receive it and then process it and think better about or different about cannabis, which is what I'm seeking with this podcast and every episode. So I want to thank you, from the bottom of my heart. Again, I appreciate your time. And I can't wait. San Francisco is one of my destinations. I'm in San Diego, as you know. So when I get ready to come to San Francisco soon, I'm going to let you know, and I want to see, where you work and how you do things.
Happy to have you. You're absolutely welcome. We can have a sit down and chat some more. Okay.
Listen, Doctor, it has been fantastic, and as interesting as I thought it would be. It's even more so. So I thought it was going to be $1 million, episode. It's turned out to be $1 billion episode. So thank you again very much. I really appreciate your knowledge and your time, and we look forward to having you back again. So maybe in a few months, you'll hear my call or you'll see my email, and I'll say, hey, do you have some time to talk about what you're doing right now? And hopefully you'll say yes, and we'll bring you on. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Leroy from Cannabis Enlightened. Join us again on our next episode, and reach out to us at cannabisenlightened.com.
If you'd like to hear more Cannabis Enlightened with Dr. Leroy, be sure to visit us online at cannabisenlightened.com and subscribe wherever you download your podcasts. Cannabis Enlightened is produced in San Diego, California, and presented by March and Ash at marchandash.com. On behalf of Dr. Leroy, I'm Chris Cantori, and thank you for listening.
OLOS Media.